the discussion. So, okay, over to you, Dick.
Hey, thanks, Lynn.
Oh.
Yeah. Lovely to be here. I was saying to Claire just before, I'm feeling a bit nervous about this because it's quite a long time since I've done an academic presentation. I do lots of talks. Well, lots. I do my fair share of talks in the crypto community, who have critical skills in certain direction, not in the sphere of economics and political economy. So having to come to this audience is I'm feeling a bit apprehensive. Anyway, I'll crash through that. About crypto, you know? Bryan? And is there anyone here who has crypto as their principal research area? I mean, other than doing commentaries? Come closer, Lynn. Yeah? Yeah, it's all up and going. All right, I'll talk louder. So that's a bit of a concern that there's not a focus on crypto here. I'm not sure what the solution is. Maybe it's to change the name of the school to the History of Social Science. Right. That would sort of solve the problem. Anyway, I always find it's good to be a bit antsy with your audience to start with, get them offside, so that they don't expect too much from you. I also need to say, I won't be saying that much about environmental tokens. Probably as the thinking for this class has gone on and on, I've decided to say less and less, at least in detail. I've watched a few environmental tokens up close. I was at the launch of 2 of them, just for the beers, in Berlin a few weeks ago. And you just shake your head and you say, are people really going to invest in this? And unfortunately, the answer is yes, they do, because I believe a lot of these tokens have no deep material coherence to them. Let's put it that way. So let me carry on, because I assume that people here, except for perhaps 1 or 2, don't have any or much background in crypto. So let me, without turning this into a crypto 101 class, which I would never presume to do because I don't feel capable of doing it. I know certain things, but only certain things. So a couple of concepts I want to introduce to reframe the way you probably think. First of all, the concepts of tokens and a blockchain. As economists, we can have a very clear take on what a blockchain is. It's a ledger. It's a ledger that is not held by a central authority. It's held in a distributed way on a whole set of computers, but it is a ledger. The consequence of it being a ledger is 2 things. One is everything that enters that ledger has to be measurable. You can't put unmeasurables, by definition, you can't put unmeasurables onto a ledger. The second thing to say there is that all entries on the ledger have to go in both directions. For those of you who have, say, followed Perry Merling's work, the money approach, you'll know he analyses the economy, he analyses banking, but economic processes more generally in terms of ledger transfers. Very precise, very orderly, which is no different from precise. So it's just a point of emphasis, really. But everything there is measurable. And we're really doing, or we need to think of crypto in these same terms. So a token then is an expression of the right to change the ledger. The transfer of something sees something going in one direction, the token going in the other direction. So the books have to balance. It's very much basic accounting. So the interesting question is then what those tokens stand for. What's the thing that gets transferred when a token gets transferred? And the answer is it all depends on the token. let's get right away from the outset to any notion that of the 25,000 crypto tokens or whatever they are out there, they're not all in the race to beat fiat currency and become the next universal money. There's only one contender in that, and it's not seriously a contender anyway, but one that gets talked about that way, and that's Bitcoin. Every other token is doing something very specific. And what people are buying when they're buying and selling that token is gaining access either to ownership of that very specific thing or participation in that very specific thing. Sometimes ownership and using the service get a bit conflated. There's a blurring there, but both of those things are covered in the notion of what happens on a ledger. So the sorts of things that are getting transferred are commodities. So a blockchain can be used for trade. It can be used for credit. It can be used for transfers of rights to governance, decision-making power over how an organisation will be administered, and subcategories, infinitely detailed subcategories within each of those broad categories of trade, finance, governance. So a whole lot of tokens then have to be seen. Some of them are, you think about using a token to buy a good or service, trade. Many others of them, though, are more like equities. So what you're doing in that sense is buying a share in a company. They're not companies, but we'll call them companies, in an organisation, in an agent, use a network term, being a part owner of an agent, many of which we would have to call developers and providers of infrastructure. They're either making the blockchain go faster, quicker, they're integrating different blockchains, they're doing all sorts of these things that, if you accept the legitimacy of the domain of crypto as a worthy area of analysis, then inside that area, these are doing the equivalent of poles and wires to electricity production, building the exchanges, building all that sort of stuff. That's what they're doing. And the competition there, and it's a furious competition, is to say who can get that going faster, quicker, better reach, better connectivity, better data processing measures. There's lots of data, lots of tokens in there that are pitching to offer that, that capacity. So we find ourselves in the realm of saying tokens are like equities, like money, but they're not equities and they're not money. In fact, often they're blurring the categories. And one of the reasons, I'd say there are multiple reasons, but one of the reasons that crypto, the space of crypto is so unregulated is that the state simply doesn't know how to regulate it. It doesn't fit in the categories. Are these equities? Are these commodities, etc.? I mean, I've spoken to people at the tax office who say, well, we believe crypto tokens are commodities because they're not money. So you say, well, why isn't there a GST on trade? Well, there just isn't. You know, so that they fall between the cracks. And of course, to go off at a slight tangent, the whole exercise of regulating would involve not only the state making a new framework, but also giving a new legitimacy and a new order and certain sets of guarantees about the operation of crypto market that at the moment the state doesn't want to give. So again, to extend this aside, I'd say, you know, everyone says, oh, crypto is not regulated. Well, why is it not regulated? It's not the fault of crypto. It's the fault of we're talking in fault, it's the fault of the state. The state isn't regulating it, or hasn't hitherto, and we have to ask, why is the state not regulating it? If it believes there are all these rip-off schemes in there, and indeed there are, it's full of rip-off schemes, why isn't the state doing something about it? And when you hear regulators saying, oh, the problem with it is it's not regulated, you say, anyway, you get my point. So it seems to me that crypto, as we see it at the moment, is partly about the Wild West, where anything goes and people are shooting each other left, right and centre and stealing each other's cattle and whatever else goes on in the Wild West. So there's something about the Wild West, but there's also something that doesn't fit capitalism. And that's the bit that I find most interesting. It doesn't fit within capitalism. The collateral damage you've got to wear at the moment, if you're interested in crypto, is you've got to cop that you're existing in a world that is also like the Wild West. And you've got to wear some of the flack that people will want to dish out to you. But I think, you know, for me, you just got to wear that. But I think what's missing in crypto, and here's where I sort of want to move towards what I'll be talking about today. What I've been working on is how do you build an economy, a whole economy inside a token system? So we know that crypto so far has been about trade. Trade's intrinsically boring because it's just, I can say that because Bill's not here. Trade's boring because you just exchange stuff for a token. Credit, and I've got to say, when you look at the way in which credit DeFi has developed in crypto, it's hair-raisingly terrifying because it's so leveraged, it's so speculative. But, you know, that happens, they replicate capitalism on a ledger, and they do it in a, as I say, a hairy way. But essentially, they're just saying, "Oh, we can do the same thing, aren't we? Aren't we clever? Isn't this interesting?" But what's missing that I really want to work on is how do you build a whole economy, a system of accumulation that is the process of production, distribution, and exchange, a circuit of capital, a way in which a system is self-reproducing. It's not depending on speculative, on people saying, "Oh, this is a really good token, I'm going to buy and buy and buy." And then suddenly they say, "Oh, I don't want to buy," and we declare it to be Ponzi. Because those systems are never self-reproducing. They always rely on the injection of more and more funds. They always rely on hype. But how do you build an economy, a whole circuit of accumulation, surplus production inside a token system? And why would you want to do it? And the reason you'd want to do it is that accumulation, as we currently understand it, is driven by a particular unit of account. Or to put it, before we get to the specifics of a unit of account, it's driven by the concept of profit. What constitutes value in a capitalist economy? Therefore, what constitutes surplus? What constitutes the conditions of reproduction of this economy? It's all defined by reference to profit. Sure, in this economy, we can say, "Oh, there's a whole lot of good stuff that's not profitable." So we give it subsidies and we give it philanthropy and we call it, a volunteer sector. And there's a whole lot of bad stuff that we say, "Oh, we should put taxes on it," because we want to sort of adjust the profit system to fit with social values, social expectations and norms. But what if you actually said, we want to change the way we measure stuff so that this good stuff, the things we recognize as good but aren't making a profit, that we can say, hey, they actually create value. Not, to repeat, not, hey, they're good so we should subsidize them, but we need to be able to declare them as surplus generating, value generating. And that means we've got to measure the economy in new ways. We've got to measure by criteria that aren't based in profit. And I think the interesting thing for me that opens up with crypto is as soon as you get something that looks like a new form of money, I don't think it is a new form of money, but it has moneyness about it. It has those attributes. It has mechanisms of measurement. Then the question of how you measure can become a design choice. Will people take up the design? That's an important, critical question, but it's a different order of question. The thing is, I'd say, for the first time in a long time, maybe since the Bolshevik Revolution, and that was that pursuit of different units of account, different ways of measuring, turned into an unmitigated disaster. But perhaps for the first time since then, we can talk about the possibility of measuring differently. So that gets us to what we mean by value. And I want to be clear here. I'm not sitting here and the the research project that I'm involved in doesn't want to declare what value is. Don't want to say value should be based in, in a carbon. Value should be based in a helping the poor unit of account. I don't think anyone should be dictating that, because we know what happens when you have centralised impositions of how to measure. You get centralised authoritarian states that want to manipulate the whole world or their whole economy to fit their particular image. But what a blockchain and protocol design enables you to do is say, how do we create the space where a unit of account can be designed in a distributed way so that the people who participate in this network, in this economy, can themselves decide how to measure. And they can change their minds about how to measure. I mean, this idea that you've got to lock in a unit of account and it must be there forever, that's a furphy. We know historically the way profits have been measured have changed. It's changed massively over the last 250 years. It's still called profit, but we change. So we can change the unit of account. And we would want to change the unit of account because we'd say 30 years ago, if you asked people how to build a unit of account, not many people would be saying, hey, we want an environmental index heavily weighted inside that unit of account. Some people would have been saying it, but not many. Now everyone would say it. So you've got to be able to measure things in a way that reflects social values at the time. If that makes the social unit of account flexible, and that means that some production processes can't plan for the next 30 years, tough. That's the way it's going to be. We're already seeing that with what's happening to coal, to energy production, to coal mines. We're saying you used to be great value producers. Now we don't want you. And that's got to be okay. In fact, that's a strength of the system. So what we could say about the unit of account is, well, first of all, I should just backpedal a second and say, what's the unit of account? I think there's a danger that people think a unit of account is Australian dollars compared with Zimbabwean dollars. But that's not what a unit of account means. And indeed, if that were what a unit of account meant, even the neoclassical economists with their functionalist definitions of money wouldn't describe naming something the Australian dollar, naming it the Zimbabwean dollar. That's not a function of money. That's just attributing a signifier to a money form. The particular pictures on the banknotes. A unit of account is a unit of value, and in that sense, in advanced capitalist societies, probably in all capitalist societies, they have basically the same unit of account. I mean, it'll be a bit different because the tax regimes are different, the cost structures are a little bit different, but essentially they're all using the same unit of account. And the International Accounting Standards Board requires it. If you want to construct accounts for your company, you've got to comply with certain rules so that people in other countries can interpret what those accounts mean. So sure, there are important differences between what goes on under the Australian dollar and what goes on under the British pound at the moment. But really, in the broad spectrum of things, these are processes that are measuring the same way. And I'm saying what's important about crypto is that it can measure by different criteria, not just tweaks at the edge as we currently find nation-state policy does. So what could we say about the unit of account as we see it today? One, it snuck up on us. It's sort of just, we were all born into it. It's been around, it's been evolving for 250 years. No one ever, this is social contract theory. No one ever jumped up and said, yes, that's the unit of account I want to be born under or I want to live under. Second, it's based on profit. And third, if we ask what sustains the current unit of account, the answer is always the state. Every layer, the state issues, the state manages, the state regulates, the state oversees the cultural process, that makes people adhere to a unit of account. And if the state is in crisis, the money's in crisis. If the money's in crisis, as we see in the UK at the moment, the state's in crisis. The two are inextricably linked. So if you're thinking about crypto and units of account, you've got to separate it from the state. You've got to have a more general approach to understanding what a unit of account is and what its conditions of existence are, so that the state system is just seen as a special case, maybe the prevalent case, maybe the overwhelmingly prevalent case, but just one way of doing it. Otherwise, if it's definitionally money in units of account have to be tied to the state, then we're done and dusted. We all go home right now and say we live under it and there's no choice. But if we think about it as a design choice, then we have to say where we can build accounts by any criteria we like. We could set up accounts that say carbon abatement is an asset and carbon emission is a liability. And we could account for everything in the economy, every output of the economy by a carbon unit. Don't care about profits. Just say if it's carbon, then it's an asset. If it creates emissions, it's a liability. And you can look at every single output and say, oh, look at its cost of production. Well, that bit's abating, that bit's creating. The net position is that this output creates a surplus. That is, it's net carbon abating. And we could say further, if we wanted to get rhetorical about this, oh, but what about profit? Well, you put the profit statements in an ancillary document next to the company accounts. Just as we now have profit-based accounts, what's the environmental impact? Well, we've got another little report on that. Is it quantitative? No. We measure a few little things, but we can't reconcile it with the main report. We just treat it, oh, we're very serious about it, but it's not serious enough to get on the books of the company and measure its performance. I'm saying we could flip that around. We could measure any units we want. So that's why I want to talk about non-state moneyness, if you like, because it's non-state units of account, because that's how we get to these issues. So there are two issues I want to put together. How long have I been going, Lee? 15 in round numbers, yeah? All right. Two issues I want to put together that come out of this. First, without the state declaring something to be money, non-state money must take the form of finance. I'll repeat that. If you want to look at money outside the sphere of the state, non-state money must take the form of finance. It must be a position between that links the present to the future, and the form of that is a financial contract. The state can say, we declare this to be money, and we all comply and say yes. But if there's no one able to give that declaration, then what gives integrity to this stuff that someone may produce is that it talks between the present and the future. That would be a deep proposition I'd put, that we have to keep shifting the moneyness of crypto from the sphere of state issuance to the sphere of finance. And I'll talk about this as we go. It's got to be about flows and interactions, not about declarations. The second thing I want to say is that if money is not definitionally tied to the state, then it has to have three attributes. First of all, there has to be a direct connection between the intrinsic value of the thing being measured and the way it's measured. We have to be able to see that association, the intrinsic value of the thing being measured and the way it's measured. There must be a correspondence there. Secondly, there must be regulatory mechanisms of stabilisation and verification. And third, there must be systematic popular acceptance and trust in that money. So again, there must be some, put it simply, underlying value, fundamental value that connects that which is being measured to how it's measured. There has to be a regulatory stabilisation process, and there has to be some mechanism of popular acceptance. How do we then treat these three conditions as financial processes? If I'm saying crypto has to be put into the realm of finance, we have these three conditions. What is the financial take on those three conditions? So first, the intrinsic value issue. Anything can be a unit of account, you know, a ton, a megawatt, a like. These are all units of account. But to be socially integrated, they must become commensurable. You've got to be able to compare megawatts with likes if you're going to have a unit of account that covers those areas. And here we get to the, you know, what Marx called the general equivalent, or what Keynes called the greatest of own interest rates. And I won't, you know, the paper that may not have been circulated, there's a lot about Keynes and Schaffer and Marx. I'm not talking about them, but people who know Keynes and Schaffer and Marx will know when Keynes is talking in chapter 17 of the general theory, talking about money, the state's money, as the greatest of own interest rates. He's saying, hey, of all units of measure, the state one works best for these reasons, and he lays them out. But how robust are these various alternative non-state measures as processes of commensuration? Well, if we frame this as an open question, in which we don't say the state's money is money because the state says it's money, we've got to say on this condition of the underlying value, fiat currency is incredibly weak. Once the world left the gold standard and then Bretton Woods as a tenuous connection, money has lost its connection, losing it increasingly rapidly as we speak. Quantitative easing has all been about disconnecting. You know, the ability of a central bank to just keep churning money into the economy has all been breaking this connection between the value of the underlier and the monetary unit that is used to represent it. And surprise, surprise, we find ourselves in a world of inflation, and a world of inflation that was supposed to be a passing little problem of a war in Ukraine, but turns out to be something way more endemic. Who should be surprised when you inflate the asset market, you cause asset price inflation everywhere, and it spills over into goods and services inflation? Anyway, I don't want to get into a rant about how appalling central bank interventions have been over the last decade. I just want to say this is an emerging problem for fiat currencies, that there's a growing disconnect, the amount of money in circulation and the underlying processes, and I believe it's already showing up. We could say Bitcoin has exactly the same problem. In Bitcoin, there is no direct link to an underlier. Some people say to me, that's not true. The underlier of Bitcoin is that people want to hold it, that it's a cultural statement, that Bitcoin is a bet against fiat currency. If you go to Keynes, and Keynes says, why do we hold cash? He says, because we don't know the future. So we go to cash, we give up, we forego interest on you know, through illiquidity because we want to hold cash. We frame that financially. Keynes is saying cash is a put option on the future. It's a bet that the future is going to be worse. So we don't want to be exposed to the future. So we're buying a put option, and the price of the put option is interest foregone. Even if you don't understand put options, you'll get the point that I'm making. But hey, Keynes' statement is, but if you hold cash, then it's safe. What if cash isn't safe? What if you can't trust the state? Then you say, where can I go? Where's the put option on the state's money? The put option that's currently being used is Bitcoin. Is it good? Is it intrinsically virtuous? Doesn't matter. I think the question about Bitcoin has to be, people have to ask is, it's all a Ponzi scheme, etc. is the line. But it's actually meeting a social need. How do you bet against capitalist money? You buy Bitcoin. And what we can see in the Bitcoin market is that people are holding it longer and longer. We've had a massive crisis in the world economy, and the stock market's only been held up by pumping money into buying assets. No pumping, no state underwriting of Bitcoin. So in Australian dollars, its prices dropped from a peak of $80,000 to $30,000 it is now. It's not falling any further. It's been $30,000 for a couple of years now. People are signaling they want to hold Bitcoin at $30,000 a Bitcoin, even though other people say it's worthless. So the cultural question has to be asked. Why are all these people saying, but I believe in it. That's its underlier. It's a cultural statement as a bet against capitalism. I mean, of course, there are speculators in there as well who are just saying, I'll buy anything that I can buy. But since it's gone down in price, that's been culled. So anyway, that would be my proposition. There is an underlier to Bitcoin. But to go back to my earlier proposition that some people, such as Phil, screwed their face up at, that we need to frame this, we need to frame money as finance. How do we frame Bitcoin? It's a put option. So we give it a financial integrity that is not just saying, it's a competitor with state money. So I need to move on, despite or including Lynn's generosity there of a couple of minutes in her unit of account. The second dimension is the regulatory issue. No, gee, there's more I need to say about this first issue. Sorry, because I can whiz through the other two quite quickly. There are a whole lot of tokens, including environmental tokens, that really fall at this first hurdle of the underlier. So let me give you an illustration of just a couple of environment-based tokens that don't meet this connection between the token and the underlier. There were been a few tokens out there that say, we care about carbon emissions. We love the carbon market, carbon credits. Every time a carbon credit is issued, we will issue you a token. And people get on this and say, yeah, we want carbon credit. We love the fact that that the carbon market is that the carbon emissions is a marketized way of making carbon emissions more expensive. So we want to get into this. But of course, there's no underlier to that token. They don't own carbon credits. They're just saying every time there's a carbon credit, if you want it, we'll give you a token. So it's a hype, it's a Ponzi scheme because there's no connection to the underlier. If people get off this token and say, well, there's something else better over here, they just dump it. There's no underlying asset. There's no derivative. It's sort of a derivative position, but it's not a material connection. It's just saying every time this happens, we have no control of it. We'll issue a token. Doesn't work. The more advanced versions on this are tokens that are actually buying up carbon credits. And they're saying our strategy is to make carbon credits so expensive that the emitters won't be able to afford the costs of emission. So they buy up carbon credits. I mean, leaving aside the issue of the quality of the carbon credits they're buying up, and as Stephen Long's next four corners is going to show, these are being churned out, in his case in the highlands of New Guinea, they're being churned out as fast as the printing machine will work. But leaving aside that quality issue, there's no business model here because you buy up an asset that in a capitalist economy is treated as an asset, like a right to emit. And you say, we're going to bury it under the ground and pour concrete over the top of it. It's no longer an asset. It's not a performing asset. So why would you buy into a business that says we're acquiring assets and we're turning them into non-assets? It's not sustainable. It doesn't have a circuit of reproduction. It's always ultimately going to rest on this notion. I think it's a good idea. I think it's great that we're intervening in the carbon market. I'm going to buy this token. I mean, politically, I don't like it because, we know there's a whole history of this, from people buying slaves and setting them free to buying up student debt, at 5 cents on the dollar and declaring to the student, well, if you give us 5 cents on the dollar, we'll declare your debt later, etc. This playing the market doesn't have a good politics for me, but also as a business plan, it's not investing in an asset. Anyway, I'll move on. The second dimension is the regulatory issues that I talked about. And again, the state has all the apparatuses available to it. It's got, APRA and ASIC and around the world, there are all these equivalents. And even when those regulators stuff up, they just have a royal commission that blames a couple of people and then it's, a couple of reforms back to normal. The apparatus of regulation is elaborate. Crypto definitionally can't utilize that. they're excluded from state regulation. And I'd say that's a systematic intent to stop their legitimacy, because then they can't be subject to and supervised by and validated by the regulatory process. So what they do, what crypto has done, is build its own internal regulatory mechanism. The first versions were stable coins, where they would say, we guarantee the rate on a stable coin to the US dollar at par. How do they do it? Well, they build internal market mechanisms inside the stable coin. They do things like saying, we will give an incentive for owners of this token to sell when the price goes up and buy when the price falls. They're all different stable tokens, stable coins, so they do it different ways. They will issue tokens when the price goes up and burn tokens when the price falls. They will dip into liquidity pools. They claim to be fully collateralized, even though runs on one stablecoin have shown that they're not. But anyway, they have these regulatory apparatuses, but they are internal to themselves. We find increasingly with tokens, including environmental tokens, they start to build these elaborate internal governance mechanisms to say, we can stabilize the price of this token because we have an internal treasury that will do all these fancy arbitrage, liquidity pool, burning and issuing processes to stabilize. And some of them are incredibly ingenious and incredibly elaborate. The question that doesn't get asked is, what do you stabilize in relation to? Most of them defer to fiat. So we've got an environmental token that is tied to carbon credits. How do we show this is a stable token? Oh, we can stabilize its price in US dollars. But what do you do when the price of carbon credits starts to fall? What are you trying to target? Are you trying to target a price that's stable in the US dollar or a price that's stable in the carbon market? But to be more general about this, say, crypto tokens often don't know what stability means. They don't know where their anchor point is because they're sort of outside fiat money, but they're always wanting to get the deference of fiat money. My position on this, if you're building a whole economy, is stability should not be defined. The claim to stability is that you can verify a connection inside your system between the value of the internally used token and the value of output. So it's a whole unit of account calculative system. Stability is internal. This is going to be an alternative to capitalism. It's got to say, we are not looking for judgments that we too make it in the capital market, but we can measure differently and coherently within our own calculative system. But I'm going to move on. So it's just, let me add there, just as I look at my notes, it's getting much more towards the notion of fundamental value. We've got to have in crypto something that's much more like what Graham and Dodd were doing in the 1930s about valuing corporations, or the way Warren Buffett did. I'm interested in the fundamentals. I think crypto needs tokens that tag the fundamentals. Even if their prices may go all over the place, they say, this is our fundamental value. You can trade it wherever you like, but this is our claim, pure and simple. So the third dimension, because I think time. Oh, I accelerated really well. So the third dimension, you'll recall from that list. Oh no, sorry. Let me just finish the second point, just to reiterate a point. Remember, again, I was saying the goal here has to be to financialize the conditions of money. And here I'm saying the fundamental value question, that having that anchor point, having the spread between the price and the underlying value, that's the financialization process. In the state, we call it regulation, a regulatory system of making sure there is due process. In crypto, because it can't do that, all you can do is say there are clear, transparent mechanisms that link token values to underlying values. Sorry, token prices to underlying values. And the only way you can do that is by having transparent governance processes that say, this is how we're planning to do it. Some of those, many of those, I think are pretty flawed, but they're interesting attempts. And these processes are getting better and better as we go along. And the shift over the last 2 years has been extraordinary. They're still flawed, and they're still subject to raids, as is any financial institution subject to a raid. But, you know, in fiat, there's the central bank is declared that it will it will bail out at least the system, if not particular individual banks. No one's doing that in crypto. So it's always going to be fraught in that regard, but that's the attempt. So this third dimension about popular acceptance and trust. For fiat money, it's absolutely easy. You know, money is tied to the state. It's the state all the way down. I trust the state. I trust money. And as I said before, when you stop trusting the state, you also stop trusting the state's money, but more particular, it goes the other way, as we've seen played out in extraordinary ways in Britain over the last few years. That here's this crazy state intervention that within a week within a few days has created a sterling crisis that then leads to a pension fund crisis because of the value of bonds. The independence of the central bank, which was to say, oh, well, we're not doing any more quantitative easing. The era of that has gone because we need to do a tightening process because there's inflation. But the panic's on. So the central bank says, we're buying up bonds. We've got to reflate the bond market. So it seems to me, if we're putting this legitimacy question, I need to frame it this way. I want to frame it this way. The financial sector are terrorists. Those institutions are terrorists. They strap sticks of illiquidity to themselves, and they say to the state, if you don't guarantee our liquidity, if you don't guarantee asset prices, we will detonate. And if we detonate ourselves, we'll take the whole economy with us. You know, that Nobel Prize winning Ben Bernanke was saying in the context of the global financial crisis, if we don't bail out this bank, there will be no economy on Monday. The banks will shut down, the ATM machines will be shut down. There will be complete chaos. They know they can create chaos, and they say the condition of not creating chaos is you must guarantee our profitability, and that means you must guarantee asset prices in the capital market. You must guarantee liquidity. So wouldn't it be great for crypto if they could say, we too can strap illiquidity to ourselves and detonate, because it does detonate. And there are scams out there that are detonating all the time with a lot of collateral damage, but they don't have that liberty to be able to say to the state, you must guarantee our legitimacy. So the argument again comes back to the question of making this connection, this fundamental value question, a connection between the token and underlying value. So for the legitimacy question and the popular acceptance question, the issue is, how is value being defined? That's the key issue. Now, it could be a process of historical evolution, as we had with capitalism, but I don't want to wait 200 years for that arm wrestle to happen, and I'd back the state and I'd back capitalism in that arm wrestle anyway. So this is the politics of what I feel I'm involved in. It could be a centralized determination. Someone can issue a token and declare, this is what we mean by value, and they will find some adherents, and they will have to prosecute their alternative notion with all the might of a state by expelling people from their system and all that sort of, you know, and we know where that centralized determination of an economic system leads. The alternative is to say a blockchain, and I'm not going to talk much about this, but it's the most interesting bit, but I'm going to have to stop in a second. The alternative is to say that a blockchain and the distributed participation in that blockchain, that there are all these agents, whether we talk of an agent as a single individual or an organisation, could be a big organisation with sub-agents inside it. But anyway, we talk about this network, there's all these connections flying in all these different directions. How do we design a system that will use those connections to articulate what constitutes value? How can we use it as a voting process, if you like, without saying we are going to have elections about what value is, but how can you use the market and market signals to get a sense of what people think of as value? So, and I'll spend 2 minutes on this. Because to tell the whole story would take quite a long time, and it's the project that I've been working on in the Economic Space Agency. The issue we have to deal with is that the whole lot of good stuff that happens in capitalism doesn't go through the market, and it should never go through the market. So you can't use the market to measure as the way of measuring value. Therefore, you can't always use ledgers as the way of measuring value, because the stuff that doesn't go to the market isn't of itself going to get onto the ledger unless there's a token transfer, etc. So how do you do it? You do it through focusing on production. Ledgers focus on exchange. And so it took us a while to understand. For you guys, it'll be the bleeding point. But how do you put the sphere of production onto a ledger that is actually measuring exchange? The answer is you focus on stake, or what we would call investment. You design an economy where agents stake each other. Everyone invests in who else in this network whose output we believe creates value. To invest in another agent, you must give up investment in yourself. So it's a zero-sum game. It all becomes, if you have staking in a zero-sum game, it becomes an expression of intensity preference. So you're not looking at intensities of preference on outputs, because as I say, a lot of them won't enter the market. But you're expressing intensities of preference on agents who produce outputs. So I could say, I think that someone who provides food from a food van for homeless people, they are creating value. That food will never get on the ledger. But the organisation that creates the food by being staked, I'll finish my sentence with a lot of semicolons, that I've lost it now. So that organisation that gets staked, and the staking preferences you find around the economy will be an expression of what the network thinks is value. And agents, people, like that the agents is the better term, they'll change their views. They say, hey, I stake this organisation, but it's actually not delivering. I thought it was going to be a really good idea, but they've got a bad business plan. They say they're feeding people, but they're not really. I'm going to sell my stake in that, and I'm going to go over here. So there's a discipline of the market. It's not driven by profit. It's driven by what people think creates value. And this network, this unit of account, can therefore be flexible and endorse social views of what is valuable. That's what my group's been, well, I'm not going to take any credit for this, but doing the protocol design of, doing the programming of, a system of mutual staking that can record values, and you can only do that successfully. You can only do it at scale on a blockchain. Do it in community currencies, but they all rely on direct trust. You know, you've got to know the other people in the community. You can do it in communes, but they don't scale. The only way you can have this mechanism scale, think about expansion and a system of accumulation and production, is if you put it on a blockchain. And the focus on stake gives you a mode of access to that question of what current views about value are. So that's where I'm working and fighting, mainly internal fighting within my group as much as fighting with the rest of the world. But that's my take on blockchain. And thanks for listening.
You thought you couldn't talk for 40 minutes.
What did I get to?
49.
Oh, really?
in what you were talking about. So I'm going to open it up for questions now, and I'm going to start with our friends on the Zoom. So Claire, I'll go to you first.
Thanks, Lynn, and thanks, Dick, for the presentation. It's great. I'm not sure if John Michael is in the audience. No, he's not. Okay. He's my supervisor, and I'm looking at this whole world of blockchain, well, digital exchange and digital currencies, but more from a political financial power perspective. So while we're coming at it from different perspectives, I really found today's presentation very interesting. So thank you, and I'd love to sort of connect some more beyond this. If I can pick up the issue of regulation, I'm interested in, you made the comment around the state doesn't choose to regulate sort of the, the unregulated crypto sort of Bitcoiny things as a way of devaluing and delegitimizing it. I'm interested in your thoughts around whether or not, or what you would consider around the proposition that part of the reason perhaps that they don't regulate it is because of the politics of it in allowing, those who hold financial power to sort of further test or shift the functions of the financial system for their own purpose. So sort of think hegemony and think sort of cycles of power and all of that kind of stuff. So kind of interested in your thoughts around that, and to what degree maybe you think that's part of the dynamic or not. Sorry,
Claire, are you saying the state is trying to, in a sense, look after crypto by keeping it outside of that power structure and issues of hegemony?
Not necessarily to keep it out of that structure, but more so, I guess one of the things that I'm trying to explore is to determine, or to explore the proposition that, to your point around fiat currencies, the current structures of the financial system and sort of fiat currencies reaching the limits of its usability, and therefore it's sort of the inference, or the natural sort of next step is that, the way that we create money, how it moves, how it stores, needs to undergo sort of a reincarnation, and therefore it's to the benefit, say, of, American hegemony and the US dollar to enable crypto, Bitcoins, the ledgers, all those sorts of things to almost sort of test and learn how limits of power can be shifted, and the bits of, that American power, for instance, may look to sort of pick up and embed in what emerging money may look like, to that degree or not. And, the degree to which these emerging challenges may actually sort of have unintended consequences about reducing power. So that's kind of more so where I'm coming from.
Okay, and I'm going to turn around and look away from you. But
that's okay.
Actually look at you. So I think the interesting thing about Claire's question is, and it is an interesting question because it's playing out the way Claire described it. And the trigger here was the invention, development of stable coins. Because stable coins that are issued at par with a fiat currency, usually the US dollar, they're sort of, they cross the bridge between the world of crypto and the world of fiat. So you can sort of use them as if they were fiat currency. They can stand in for fiat currency because if you believe the guarantees that lie behind them, if they're at par, then they have a moneyness about them. And there's a whole regulatory literature in the US going back quite a long way about the idea that, well, it's not the question of whether they're money or not, it's whether they can stand in for money. So you find that the development of stable coins opens that issue, and the central banks went into a bit of a panic about that. And what's come out of it is explorations of central bank digital currencies, which are basically stable coins offered within the state. The naive man who runs the central bank in Australia made an announcement recently that said, the Reserve Bank of Australia is looking at developing a central bank digital currency. But the first question we've got to look at is, why do we want one? So it seems the capacity to develop these things and the need to be seen to be playing the game has run ahead of why they might exist. And I think there's quite a lot of literature out there that's saying central bank digital currencies have come in as a defensive mechanism so that you can have crypto without having crypto. So in a sense, what we're seeing being occupied, and of course, these will all be subject to state regulation. You know, I think there's a lot that's good and interesting about central bank digital currencies. There's lots that's bad and dangerous. There's lots that the banking sector should be worried about, because if there's a central bank digital currency, we will all have bank accounts. If it goes retail, at the moment they just talk about it as wholesale, we will all have deposit accounts at the central bank. And the commercial banks won't like that one iota, but it is the logical consequence. So there's a lot of panic there. So we are at this frontier of saying there is a legitimacy to crypto. How can the state be seen to be a player so that all these people who are attracted to both the novelty of it, but also the cheapness of it, because it is such a cheap way of transacting, that we've got, the state has to block that. It's interesting that these explorations aren't necessarily centred in the US, but I'm not following that regulatory debate closely. So Claire's insights, you know, and I guess what Claire's alluding to is about it being a contested area is a really interesting place we've got to look out for in the next couple of months. But I think the state's running blind in this area, not flailing, not knowing what it's doing. Thanks.
I asked you to keep your answers a little.
But it was a gem of an answer.
It was a gem of a question. Okay, so let's go to the room. I'm looking at questions. It's like class. You can't. There's only 8 of you. All right. I've got another question on the Zoom, but yeah.
Thank you for such a good, it's just been so serendipitous, like it's hit everything that we've talked about in 6901, quantitative easing, inflation, unit of account. It's been, anyway, it's probably not a coincidence, you know, you supervise Mike and Mike supervised me and it's all, you know, but
it's all a network.
Yeah. The question I wanted to ask was about the elephant in the room for me in all these decisions, weapons. You know, we can have all this Perry Merling talk about, but I love Perry Merling. I love the critical macro finance view. And it's all about, well, you know, agents, we have hierarchies of balance sheets and it's about the perception of the risk of the guarantor to be able to pay. And for Perry Merling, it ends up kind of boiling down to exactly what you say. It's the state all the way down. The moneyness of an asset is essentially, it's got to go back through the spider web to some kind of guarantee of state backedness.
At least one level up the chain,
yeah.
If not all the way up the chain.
And there's a sort of Perry Merling thing of, you know, what is money, you know, what is money above you is credit below you, et cetera, right? And de-risking is kind of trying to draw some little tenuous spider web back to, you know, state guarantees. But the thing that I always come back to is, why is the state the ultimate guarantor? And I can't think of any answer other than the state has many, many weapons. You know, why is, we were talking in class, why is the US dollar the global reserve currency? One legitimate answer is the US has weapons, so many weapons all over the world, you know. And so if we're talking about getting away, that fundamental breaking point of the state is not the guarantor of legitimacy. How does weapons and violence come?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. And I sort of wished you hadn't asked it because in a way, the answer is going to get me in a temporary alliance. And I want to emphasize it is a temporary alliance with some of those right-wing crazies in the US who hate the state, who question the legitimacy of having a central bank because they say, but the central bank is there just to sterilize, to sanitize, to launder the profitability of the private banking system. And so they're the real people in control. and the weaponry of the state, both the legal weaponry and ultimately the military weaponry of the state about enforceability, is all to back the power of finance. Now, I think that's pretty trivial and trashy, but it's not entirely wrong. The finance system, if people understood how credit is created, that it's created by private banks, they would have to say, this is a bit of a scam. That being registered by the state as a private bank is a right to issue credit, and a right to issue credit is a capacity to issue money. Why are these banks so profitable when they keep on stuffing up all the time? So they need the artillery of the state, because the banking system cannot survive without that, because they would devour each other and devour themselves. So without giving a technical answer, I would say maybe the question is asked the other way around, and that is, it has to be posed the other way around over that 230-year history. How has the rise of capital given rise to the need for the state to play certain roles to entrench the capacity of capital to be capital, because it can't do it without the state? So I think if you frame it that way, you can easily get into conspiracy theories, and I don't want to get into all the details of conspiracy theories, except to say a class story is sort of a conspiracy, a long, slow motion conspiracy, but I'd frame it in those terms. What would you say?
Yeah. I mean, that's incredibly difficult. I really like what you said about which way around do we flip it? You know what I mean? I mean, this has been in the news so much. We live in a world with so many weapons, and we could fight wars for the next 500 years and not use all of these weapons. So why do we have all these weapons? Well, because we have a system where the state has to take the hit on adjustments to the price structure. Why does no one then come calling for the state? Because they have all these weapons and the weapons guarantee production. You know, so it comes back to what you were saying, perhaps, about tying the unit of account. You have to tie the unit.
And power and the state unit of account may be the equivalent of shorting the state in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
You know, it's just a massively more leveraged form of legitimacy, of popular. Well, we're scared of the state, so we use its money.
Right. Okay. Now we'll go to Puya on the Zoom. Right.
Thanks. Thanks, Dick. It was really fascinating. My question is probably mostly is related to my lack of knowledge of crypto and probably even money. But what I was thinking is that, so the transactions are done by some computer program, some coding. So someone codes that, someone decides to code it, somebody codes it, somebody maintains it, somebody develops it and improves it. Then during the life cycle, you have people who, computers that run those transactions and keep the ledger going. And I guess with Bitcoin, it's called like mining, like some people get some money for using their like resources. So my question is that, what is the role of these transactions? What are the roles of ownerships here? So somebody, I don't know if somebody owns the code, but somebody has influence on the code. Somebody owns those computers and resources that run the transactions. So if it's not going to be the state, what is the role of power? What are the power relationships here? Thanks.
Thanks, Peter. That is an interesting question, and it sort of has a little bit of the theology of crypto. What was in the beginning? Did it spontaneously come into existence, or was there a creator? And clearly in crypto there is a creator. And the formation of Bitcoin, the Bitcoin white paper was the in the beginning statement. And it has to be said that while there is all this talk in crypto about it being decentralized, that is, that the ledger is maintained, all these people who are doing mining to validate, to say, yes, we can confirm that there has been this transfer from that account to that account to stop the double spend problem, that keep the ledger honest. The concept of decentralization, going out to these miners, has embedded within it the notion of centralization. So there is a centrally designed and issued ledger. And we would have to say, or I would have to say, those initial versions of crypto tokens couldn't be otherwise, because the world didn't have the capacity to bring anything that's distributed into existence. And indeed, one of the really interesting issues in crypto now is, how do you bring a network into existence in a way that is innately distributed, that doesn't have a central authority? And it's a juggling act that might also be about smoke and mirrors. But anyway, the issue as it now arises is, we can say there was a first generation of crypto where there was a central ledger managed in a distributed, in a decentralized way. But what we're finding with new versions of crypto, and particularly the development of DAOs, distributed autonomous, I always get this wrong, distributed autonomous organizations, is that they are building into the protocol design the disempowerment of a central authority. So they come into being with a central authority, but it's framed as scaffolding. And inside this distributed governance mechanism says, as soon as we get up and running, we pull down the scaffolding. So in the beginning was the creator, but the creator becomes part of history and has no longer any presence in this network. And the network itself in its governance has the capacity to transform its own governance, and therefore to eradicate the power of a central authority. Now, whether this will actually ever play itself out as robustly as the design says, or whether these distributed organizations will keep forking, or what the rest of the world calls splitting, and have factions, history will have to play itself out. But nonetheless, I think what's interesting is that there is the capacity to design protocols that will operate in a distributed way. And when people join these protocols now, they join these networks, there is a level of sophistication that says people know what the governance mechanisms are in the network they're joining. They know whether it is going to be distributed in its operation, or it's going to be centralized with some powers passed down to the, to the individuals. So I think there is a strong awareness of this. But as I say, whether the solutions that make these systems distributed or not, I think it's playing out right now, has been over the last 12 months. Was that short enough, Lynn?
That was great. Nice and focused. Nice, and I won't use the word succinct, but nice and focused. Go to my colleague, Garrett.
Thanks, Lynn. That was very, very good, Dick. Really enjoyed it. I was interested in what you're saying about the relationship between stabilization, system stabilization, and fundamental value. And you're obviously right about the way that at the moment system stabilization is being secured by debasing or something fundamental value through, where the only real fundamental value is liquidity, really. Like liquidity is real, and fundamental value is just some kind of accounting construction. And so I'm interested that you are then arguing that the way you see the promise in crypto is to kind of get back to a kind of a fundamental value, but of a different variety, one that's more democratic, one that's more socially and environmentally beneficial. And so what I'm wondering is, how do you see which is kind of like an anti-speculative position. So I'm wondering, what role do you see for speculation in the sort of crypto token system, new economic system that you're envisaging? So obviously it seems like a funny question, because obviously crypto is very associated with speculation, but the vision you're outlining isn't sort of against that. You're kind of defying DeFi or something in some way. So, what is the kind of equivalent for being able to kind of maintain those speculative positions through, the provision of the equivalent of liquidity to kind of allow a different type of speculation, potentially like, one that is, you know, taking speculative positions on stuff that we might actually like to see, but we're not sure if it is going to work.
Okay, that's really interesting. So just a little preliminary comment, which is to say, I like what you say about liquidity is, you know, once upon a time, the principal public good was health, education, welfare, and the budget and state expenditure would be oriented towards saying we must meet these basic needs. Now we say stuff those. It's all about guaranteeing liquidity. Most state expenditure in the world at the moment is to guarantee liquidity in capital markets. It's not to meet those old public good demands. They're being sacrificed, you know, right now. On the speculation issue, I mean, there's lots of layers to engage this. One is to say, well, speculation's got a bad name because being given a bad name because everything's speculation. Every investment, every position on the future is a speculative position because we don't know what the future holds. So you go, you know, you look at a manufacturing firm buying some plant and equipment, they're speculating on lots of different ways. I think what makes crypto particularly interesting is that it's right into the issue of volatility. And volatility and speculation aren't quite the same thing, but they're very closely connected. And so I'm finding as I watch crypto communities around the world, not only are they young people who sort of have given up on the notion of a secure job and a bank account and buying a house, etc. So they're living a life that is much more financially volatile. So the volatility of crypto sort of speaks to them as their lived experience. But these people are, I've lost my train of thought, so I'm going to have to get a new one. So the sorts of people who are interested are people who design tech, who are in a very fast changing world, people who are into fashion. You know, fashions, people who I know who teach a little bit in culture and design schools in New York, all of their students are into crypto because they understand this fast changing world and that what's valuable now may not be valuable next summer. That's sort of the experience of crypto. Underlying issue is that whereas people like Dodd and Graham and Buffett have this notion of fundamental or slow moving, but it might be quite fast moving. So we've always got to keep repositioning on what the fundamentals are. So it's always a speculation on where the fundamentals are. This idea that anchoring means locking down tight to the sea floor, it's a different notion of it's sort of anchoring to the wash of the water, holding a single position as the tides and the currents all move around you. So I think in that sense, it is a world of speculation, but we've got to stigmatize the concept of speculation and say it's not just people gambling, looking for a freebie. It's about people taking positions on the future. And I think that's always in any politics, particularly any left politics, but I guess any politics that's outside the mainstream, it's all about a willingness to speculate. So we've got to incorporate that and financialize it and choose the bits of speculation we want to do and try by these internal regulatory mechanisms to lay off, to hedge the bits of speculativeness that we don't want. So speculating is quite a strategic decision. And I think that's in crypto design, that for me is the big question.
Okay. All right. I think we might be done unless. Wait. On.
Jump in, steal the last couple of minutes if we've got some time. I wondered if you could talk a bit, Dick, about the example that you opened up at the end about the food van with the failing business model. I wondered what happens to that if you've thought through the kind of perhaps minutiae of that. So if I understand properly, in order to get stake, to participate in the network, I need to make a financial investment if I'm right about that. And then I wonder what happens if I want to sell my stake in the failing food van. I need somebody else on the other side of that. So how does the failing project end up failing? Have you done that? Have you gone to that level of thinking, or is that sort of something that happened in the process of the playing out of the network?
Yeah. No, look, it's a good question. And you know, I know Claire's been engaged in following this project for more than a few years and seen it evolve, whether it's evolved forwards or backwards or sideways is a bit of a moot point. So I know that question comes from some informed concerns. I guess what I would say here, without wanting to get into that specific issue, is the important question is, how does a network come into existence and how does it stay in existence? And the answer is, this always used to worry me, you know, that is what we're doing just the equivalent of general equilibrium theory in crypto, that sort of level of abstraction. And of course it is in you know, it wouldn't be hard to just keep teasing it out in that way. What I've observed over the last year is, as well as being a literature on playing networks into existence, how does any network get started? There's the issue that what people who you talk to are most interested in is the idea of mutual staking, of investing in each other. And they initially get drawn to it because it's a hedge. I feel emotionally, politically, socially committed to supporting the production of food for homeless people. And I would like to be mutually invested with these people because I'm an environmental activist. And I can actually name a case of, you know, a New York food van and a Finnish environmental activist who was saying we must issue tokens and be mutually staked. So what happens if the food van turns into a bummer? Well, to stick with the analogy of what happens if a capitalist startup goes broke, it'll get us a certain distance. If we push it too far, then it doesn't work. But in the time allocated, it can be something like that. We can say the network does not support or endorse. I'm selling my stake. Who wants to buy it? No one. The stake is worth nothing. But it's sort of okay because I'm diversified. The network, if there's a network of 200 different producers and I'm directly staked with 50 and transitively staked with the other 150, you know, that is in some agent that owns stake there, even though I don't own stake there, I've got an indirect exposure. So you could say this network with its diversified portfolio is sort of designed to absorb failure and designed to absorb success. So you'd say in a capitalist economy, we know businesses are failing all the time. And so that's just part of the nature of change, that things are going to fail. What you want with diversified ownership, with mutual staking, is that the food van that fails, it's going to happen a bit slowly. People will divest themselves that. This food van also owns stake in other organisations, but the exchange rate on its stake to the other organisations just gets worse and worse and worse. But it has time. It's not cut off at the knees. Now, that's probably getting into too much detail. And all the token mechanisms that would be involved in those transactions have to be played out, and only some of them have so far been programmed. But I think it can be incorporated. Another little issue that I would mention that always has to come out here, you mentioned needs some investment in the beginning. Yeah, this network is always going to have porous boundaries with fiat. Sort of wish it wouldn't. It would be so nice if you could just say, oh, we go in our little autarkic system and all the tokens buzz around and everything works. It's going to have porous boundaries everywhere. It's going to be, it's just going to have to deal with that. I think that's the politics of this thing sort of working roughly correctly and not getting hung up on treating it like a general equilibrium system. It's a political project with an economics behind it. It's not an economics that then implies a politics about libertarianism.
Probably a good note to end on, right on time. Yeah. So on behalf of the discipline, now discipline again, and being discipline, on behalf of the discipline of political economy, thank you very much for a very stimulating talk today. I've learned a lot. Yeah, I'm in an area, my head's buzzing. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Thank you to all of you guys on Zoom and some pretty amazing questions from our PhD students. And thank you all in the room. Even though you may not have asked a question, I know you're engaged. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. That was good fun.